Welcome to another edition of Chalk or Not. This week we're talking about UFC Kansas City, and I'm going to try to help you guys in terms of avoiding the chalky spots that are not worth your risk or investment, and hopefully cash in some tickets for you guys by advising you which ones are worth the chalky spots. And a reminder that in my definition of a chalky spot, it's going to be anything that is minus 185 or wider. So for this card specifically, there are 7 matchups that I'll be briefly covering and then letting you guys know whether I believe it's parlay worthy, chalk worthy, or whether you should avoid it altogether. I do quickly want to apologize once again, as obviously the last 2 weeks or so I've been in the middle of a big move here, so my studio is pretty much a mess. Still in the process of setting it up here, so no visuals in terms of at least seeing my myself, but I will do my best in terms of getting some graphics up here for you guys. I am falling behind a little bit in terms of my content scheduling, so keeping that in mind, I'm doing bare minimum work in terms of the visual aspect of these segments that I've been dropping for the rest of the week. So hopefully you guys are able to bear with me there. So none of that usual stuff that you guys are used to seeing, but you'll still get my wonderful voice advising you guys one way or the other on some of these UFC fights. All right, without further ado, let's get right into this. First matchup up we're going to talk about is Jocelyn Edwards coming in at minus 290 as she takes on Chelsea Chandler. Now, Edwards obviously is a solid striker, and she'll clearly have the striking advantage in this matchup, but it's really the physicality and strength of Chandler that gives me a little bit of pause. We've seen Edwards put on her back a few times and been grinded out by other fighters, and I don't think Chandler is necessarily as good as an Eileen Perez or some of these other fighters that have been able to defeat Jocelyn Edwards, but just that potential threat of Edwards just getting out-muscled in this fight is looming too large for my liking. But if she's able to stifle that, if she's able to keep this fight upright, I think she stalls on Chandler and would end up looking minus 290. But it's really that physicality edge for Chandler that gives me some pause here. Thus, I'll have to put Edwards in the not chalk-worthy section. All right, next up, Jacqueline Amorim coming in at minus 850, going up against the always violent and entertaining Poliana Viana. Now, this is a pretty chalky spot here, talking about, nearly 90% indicated on Amorim in this spot, and I think it's warranted. She is a high-level BJJ specialist. Viana might have a little bit of a striking advantage, but I don't think it's anything that Amorim can't deal with. I think she'll be able to change levels relatively easily, and I think that Viana has horrible takedown defense, and I think she trusts her jiu-jitsu a little bit too much, and in this case against Amorim, I think it's going to work purely against her in this spot. So I think Amorim cruises. I think she eventually gets the submission within 2 rounds, and I think she does it at a near 90% clip. Thus, I don't like, giving out anything or considering anything chalk-worthy above minus 700, but considering I'm putting Amorim between, that 85 to 90% zone, I think she's chalk-worthy in this spot. I think she is just that much better than Viana, and I think it won't take her long to eventually get that submission position and get Viana out of there. So I'm going to put Amorim in the chalk-worthy category here. All right, next up, we got Blackshear coming in at minus 460, going up against Alatengheili. Fun matchup here. Obviously, you got big chalk on the Blackshear side of things. He's a high-level BJJ black belt, has some very strong grappling and wrestling if he needs it. Obviously, cracks with a ton of power in his hands, so that's something to obviously keep in mind. But Alatengheili has some very solid wrestling chops of his own, and I think that when he relies on that takedown-heavy approach, he is very successful in a lot of his matchups, just like he was last time around against Clayton Rodriguez. Training now for a few years alongside the fight-ready guys and Henry Cejudo, you have to believe that his entries and timing is starting to get better, and I think he learned a lot from his loss to Chris Gutierrez, where he just took too long to get to his wrestling, and now he wants to get to it sooner than later. We've seen Blackshear get grinded out in the past, and we know he has a little bit of a cardio issue at times that could come back to haunt him in this matchup. I'm picking Blackshear Blackshear to win this fight. I think his BJJ is just superior, and I think that his power in his hands is obviously going to be very helpful for him as well. But if he's unable to hurt Alatengheili in certain spots or even control him for long periods of time, Alatengheili could get off on wrestling and some takedowns. And we saw Blackshear, like I said, he's been grinded out in the past. We saw Cody Gibson have some solid top control against him for a few minutes at the beginning of their matchup. And that's absolutely a possibility here for Alatengheili to do the same thing. So I'm going to categorize Damon Blackshear as not chalk-worthy in this fight because I think it is a little bit of a risk. So I'd rather just pass on this fight. I like the over 2.5. I'm expecting some back and forth grappling here that doesn't translate to a finish. But in terms of Blackshear straight up, not chalk-worthy in my opinion. All right, next up, we got a guy just on the cusp of chalk territory here where we have Evan Elder coming in at -190 going up against Gage Young. Now, this line is close enough that you could, still take a straight shot on him. It doesn't necessarily need to be a parlay piece. Elder obviously taking on a short notice Gage Young, who came up short on the Contender Series last season, but still showed solid work that he deserves to be in the UFC. So I'm glad that the UFC gave him this call up, especially with it taking place so close to home for him. But I think it's going to be the physicality and even the power punching style of Elder that's going to cause Young some problems. Young might be able to have some success with his straight punches down the pipe and that consistent jab. But I think once Elder starts to drag this into the grappling realm and really starts to get to be a little bit more grueling on Young, that's where Elder will really start to pull away in this fight. At -190, I'm fine with that. I would categorize him as chalk-worthy in this fight. If this gets up to -250, then I think we have to start considering or reconsidering our thoughts on this fight, or at least parlaying him at that number. But -190, I'm going to give him the green light. I'm going to go Evan Elder as being chalk-worthy in this fight. Our next up, Ikram Aliskerov coming in at -460 going up against Andre Muniz. Now, Muniz hasn't seen action since December of 2023, where he picked up a very close, I believe it was a split decision against the Iron Turtle, Junyoung Park. Aliskerov looking to bounce back from that knockout loss that he suffered at the hands of former middleweight champion Robert Whittaker, which I believe was back in June. So he's taken off more than enough time to come back completely healed and hopefully start marching his way back up into title contention. Very strong wrestler, and obviously we know Muniz wants to get fights into the grappling realm so he can show off his BJJ prowess, but I think he's going to struggle to do that here against Aliskerov, who should be able to dictate the pace of the wrestling in this fight, and I think that's going to allow Aliskerov to just shut down the grappling of Muniz, control the striking. I think that will allow him to really start to wear Muniz down, and I think that we'll see Aliskerov slowly pick apart Muniz and eventually finish him in the second or third round, and I think he is chalk-worthy at -460 considering the advantages he holds here. All right, next up, we got Randy Rude Boy Brown coming in at -260, going up against the 40-year-old Nicholas Dalby. Now, Randy Brown, obviously very solid striker, especially with the frame that he brings to the table. I believe 78-inch reach. I believe he's 6'3" or 6'4". Utilizes sharp strikes down the pipe, a good deep kick up the middle. His takedown defense obviously tremendously improved from earlier on in his career. And he also utilizes nasty elbows and knees whenever opponents get into closer quarters. I think this is a matchup where he can keep Dalby at range. Dalby might have moments of success where he's able to land some big shots and try to utilize that athleticism and physicality to his advantage, but I think that he's going to struggle to have vast moments of success here. I think we'll see Brown really chip away at him and just give us a classic Randy Brown performance. Whether you want to hone in on that decision prop for Randy Brown to try to save a little bit of money on his money line here, Dalby, very hard to put away. I don't think he's ever been finished, if I'm not mistaken. But I think Brown wins this fight. I think we see a classic performance. And I think he ends up looking more than his price tag here at -260, hence why I would consider him to be a chalk-worthy spot. Now, the co-main event. It is the retirement fight for Anthony Smith. He's going up against Yang Ming Yang, who's on a, I believe, 11-fight winning streak. He comes in at -420. Now, the last time Smith took on a young gun who everybody expected to just run him over, he was able to get the submission. He lulled Vitor Petrino into a bad takedown attempt, and then he eventually jumped into that guillotine and was able to get the tap. Ming Yang finished all of his fights in the first round, so there's a big question mark in terms of what his cardio will look like later on in this matchup. Should it reach the second round? I believe 3 of his 6 losses have come outside of the first round, so that's something to keep in mind. He has big power in his hands, but if he's unable to put away Smith quickly, that's where the veteran experience of Smith and the strength of schedule from Smith can really start to come away and maybe even be victorious. We've seen Smith kind of fold in some spots, but we've also seen him really bounce back, even in that rematch he had against Ryan Spann after getting his orbital broken in the second round. He went on to win the third round, which ended up being the pivotal round for him to actually win that fight. You can't overlook the experience. Say what you want about Anthony Smith. I know a lot of people like to rag on him. I've done it myself as well. But the guy is a veteran's veteran, and he's going up against a guy that's relatively untested. I know he has a good chunk of fights, but the guys he was facing on the Chinese regional scene for the most part were a lot of pushovers and tomato cans. If Smith comes in motivated, knowing that this is going to be his last professional mixed martial arts fight, this is absolutely a spot that he can go out there and show out and, kind of leave on a higher note, going into retirement here. So my prediction is still Ming Yang. I think he eventually bonks Smith and gets him out of there. But you can't overlook, the threats that Smith brings to the table, especially with his jiu-jitsu. You can get plus 1,000 on his submission prop, which is something that I really like. But in terms of this segment, I am going to put Zhang Ming Yang in the not chalk-worthy spot. Don't get too caught up in all these narratives of people making fun of a guy like Anthony Smith, especially when you're forcing yourself to eat as much chalk as you are on a guy that's not as proven, in my opinion, as Zhang Ming Yang. There are some big question marks there. So I would think twice before I parlay Ming Yang this weekend, but I will put him in the not chalk-worthy category. All right. There you guys go. Chalk or not for UFC Kansas City. I will be back later this evening for the quick picks version of this UFC Kansas City breakdown. I'll see you guys then. Peace.